Welcome to another presentation of the Sound and Emotions Conference. Today we got Suzanne Piera. Hi, Suzanne.
Hi.
Suzanne Piera holds a master's in clinical psychology and a doctorate in transformative learning and change. She has worked in treatment for mental health and substance abuse treatment for 30 years. Suzanne has been teaching for the University of Pacific in Substance Abuse Counselor's Certificate Program for 13 years. Wow, cool. What have you been up to lately?
I've been up to teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And yes.
So is it within the like a psychotherapy department kind of?
It's a special, it is. Substance abuse treatment is within mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So for the courses that I teach counselors how to diagnose and how to do assessments and help them get internships,
Mm-hmm.
and so that they can get hours to become a counselor.
Cool, cool. So I got the big question. If you had all the money in the world, what would you do to help people on the planet?
So I would open healing centers where they could be nourished with for food, for body, for soul, for recovery from all of life's stressors. Free healing centers.
Mm-hmm. It seems like there's such a lack in that area. You
There
know, I
is.
mean, there's centers here and there, and some are pretty cool. But I mean, I'm thinking if I had all the money, I would like donate, like 10,000 lounges to all these healing centers around the world.
That'd
Because
be
they've done.
that'd be excellent.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. And deck them out, right?
Yes.
I mean, have sound healing centers, therapy centers, treatment centers everywhere.
The sound and music is one of the most favorite courses and classes and groups in recovery centers.
Oh, cool, cool. Okay, so tell us a bit about your background and how you came to do what you do.
So the way that I came to do what I'm doing is through my own recovery process. So I am in recovery from addiction. And I realized that I wanted to help people. Originally, I was going to go to college for business, but I changed it to psychology and got my bachelor's and my master's and my doctorate because I wanted to help communities. And so the transformative learning and change helps both individuals and groups. I started working in a hospital with adolescents who had mental health and substance abuse as I was getting hours for marriage and family therapist license. And the transformative learning, I had to write my dissertation and find out what I wanted to find out. My question, my burning question is what helps people obtain and stay in recovery? So I did a research study and I interviewed women who had 10 or more years abstinent from alcohol or drugs. And they told me their life stories based on questions I had developed for understanding what was the environment. What is the environment that they grew up in as children? How did that form them? What was the environment that supported addiction? And what was the environment that supported recovery?
Uh, so this, I imagine, we can talk about later, is really applies to us being able to change anything in our life.
Yes, yes. And how do we change?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Right, because it's like, they kind of screwed up when they built the brain. In that it's like it builds these ruts of neural pathways, right? That are
Mhm.
really hard to change.
Yes, yes. So in my study, I identified the 4 different types of learning that can help affect this change because
Mhm.
it does have to be different aspects that have to change. So the first one is like instrumental learning, and that's when we just learn facts and information. That's learning a skill, how to drive a car, how to ride a bike, very basic information that you learn. The next would be communicative learning. Now, communicative learning, that's what we learn our brain is absorbing from our family, from our community, from our culture. So is it helpful or is it not helpful? That's what I wanted to identify for the women. How did it help? How did it form their addiction? The next complexity for learning is transformative learning. And that's where you bring to your consciousness previously unconscious ways of thinking, what you believe that you don't know you believe. It drives your behavior, it drives your actions. So you have to bring to consciousness your assumptions, your beliefs. And so it's in that, when you start to think about that, when you go into those reflective moments, it has to be the person that Jack Mesereau developed transformative learning theory, and he called them a disorienting dilemma. So it's when something happens, it just kind of shocks your belief system. And in that moment, you have to begin to evaluate the beliefs that you held, and then you can make change. Then you can change it because it doesn't make sense anymore. Do you want to kind of just a little example?
Yeah, because I'm thinking, okay, how do you identify those beliefs? Yeah, because there's I've got in my book a whole list of negative beliefs,
Oh,
like really long list for you personally, feeling how you feel about yourself, how you
right.
feel about your health, wealth, relationships, and then I'll tell you more about it in a bit. But yeah, so how do you go about finding those beliefs? Sometimes hidden, right?
Right. Usually
Sometimes
hidden.
sometimes they're pretty obvious. So I often know exactly how I think I'm not good enough.
Right. And then there's something that happened that made you think that framed that belief system.
Mm,
And so
mm.
that would be a myth. The myth is that you're not good enough. So what anchors that myth is some kind of messages you received when you were young. So once you unravel that and you go, well, that's not true. Look what I'm doing in the world. I'm achieving. And so you change your self-talk.
Mhm.
And it can be very innocuous. I had a client who was helping her adult child drink alcohol. She would, bail her out of jail. She would just pay her rent when she used it all up on alcohol. And so her friend and her said, "Why are you doing this?" She goes, "I love my daughter." And her friend said, "I hope you don't love her to death." And that shocked my client into going, "Oh no, am I helping her kill herself with alcohol?" So it was an instantly disorienting dilemma of, uh-oh, maybe I have to take a look at this and I might have to change some behaviors. So, I mean, that's a held belief. I had a friend of mine has an interesting one because he was seeing a psychologist and he wasn't paying his bill. And his psychologist asked him why he wasn't paying his bill. And he held this belief in his mind that when he went to therapy, the therapist was to give him the answer to the problem that he presented. And he goes, "Why should I pay you? Every time I bring a problem here, you don't give me the answer. I figure it out myself." And so the psychologist told him, "You don't pay me to give you the answer. You pay me to ask the right questions." And so that is the shifting of, oh, it is through the questioning, I have to come up with the answers. So that those are shifts. Those are little shifts, but there can also be bigger shifts in thinking.
So once you find that belief and pin it down, how do you change it?
So the way that you change it is you have to acknowledge that it's not true.
Uh-huh.
So, okay, it's not true. I can't go to somebody, a psychologist, and get all the answers. I have to find them for myself. So I have to ask my psychologist, how can I find these for myself? What is it? Is it journaling? Do you need to write about it? Because when you start to journal or you go deep into music with meditation, something happens internally to where you free up your thought process. And so things can bubble up. They bubble up, and all of a sudden you start to gain insights through that.
So that would be theta. You're bringing them into a theta brainwave state, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So you identify the belief, and then you say, okay, you help people just to see, or they see that it's not true.
That's right.
Although sometimes when we go mentally, it's not true. It's kind of like still in our body.
It is. It
Mm-hmm.
is.
Uh-huh.
And so what you have to recognize is, how do you repeat it to yourself in your brain that keeps it stuck?
Oh.
And so that is, there's different ways that sometimes people go get massage, and massage of body work can actually release memories out of your
Uh-huh.
body.
Or do
So
sound on that part of the body.
sound, yes. So
Mm-hmm.
it's about looking for non-traditional ways to understand how you keep that repeating pattern going. When a thought comes into your brain, oh, I'm a loser, you have to immediately reframe it in your brain yourself. No, I'm not. I already figured that out. Because it's going to take a while for those repeating. I mean, in recovery programs, they call it old tapes.
Uh-huh.
Don't play
Uh-huh.
the same tapes in your brain. So you have to begin to let go of that.
Do you have like affirmations to replace it?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And with the affirmations, sometimes if someone has, a lot of these are from childhood. There's something that has happened at a young age. The women, all 8 women in this study, were abused as children in some way or shape.
Uh-huh.
And they were also in abusive relationships as adults, which they got out of in recovery, in early recovery or mid recovery. They realized they didn't deserve to be abused.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an awakening. It's an awakening in your brain, but you have to get it into your whole body, which is the 4th type of learning, which is whole body learning.
Oh. Continue.
So,
Tell me more.
okay, so the whole body learning, now that is regarding your lived experiences. This is about what you have lived. It involves empathy and feeling and emotions. So you're making those connections. I think I had something written about that. It's also relational. It's relational. So it's relational to people. It's relational to cultures. I had one of the women in my study, she kept relapsing in her early days of recovery. And she said she had 10 brothers and sisters. And she goes, it's like, we're in this bucket when you go crabbing and you put the crabs in the bucket and they try and climb out. And she goes, I'm trying to climb out because I know I'm feeling hopeless and desperate. I'm going to die if I can't get out. And my siblings grab onto me and pull me back down. So she was trying to explain her emotions through this picture of the crabs in the bucket. She did eventually get into recovery. It was very difficult for her, and she did have to change her relationships. But the whole person learning is when you have reframed your myth, whatever myth it is, and you can hold many myths about ourselves. Then you have to get in touch with what are the feelings and emotions that come up with that myth. And how can the myth.
And that myth is so, I mean, it's, when you were talking earlier, I'm thinking there's 2 main types of myths. One is trauma, and one is basic society saying you're not good enough, which
Absolutely.
is not only advertising, but probably way worse is the way our school system works, based on competition, right?
Right. Based on competition. And ironically, in my early studies, they already know that the brain is not geared to learn mathematics when you're 11 and 12 and 13. It's not the optimum time to be having those learning processes.
Hmm.
And so it's a setup for failure.
It's so crazy because I mean, we've developed the whole system for kids for learning, and we're actually doing body percussion in different geometric shapes.
Uh-huh.
And then after they do that for years, then we start talking about the feelings and meanings of the shapes and how they're throughout nature.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And then that later leads to the math. It's like, let's look at the math, like now that you actually know how it feels.
Mm-hmm. And and the learning isn't as much about learning as memorization.
Hmm. Yeah.
Memorize these facts and let this become your reality.
Yeah. So, okay, so it seems like you're saying there's a new framework of health, which includes empathy, feeling, and emotions,
Mm-hmm.
emotional intelligence, I assume, kind of.
Yes.
Hmm. And a relationship with others and to the world that is healthy.
Yes.
Tell
Yes.
me more about that healthy framework, where we're
The-
headed.
right. The healthy framework, I really think of it like Carl Rogers. It's unconditional positive regard. So what you're doing at this point is in your relationships, you're appreciating people for who they are, not who you think they need to be.
Hmm.
Rather than being threatened by someone who is different, you're engaged and delighted by those differences.
Oh, tell me way more about this one because this is like seeing God in people.
Yes,
Right? Which is
it
really the core of not being judgmental
it is. And in my
and being,
practice,
I'm sorry, and even being able to listen,
mhm,
right?
right.
And right.
And if I had been judgmental, these women wouldn't have told me their stories.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
People can feel when you're open and when you're not.
That's so interesting. It's a vibration.
It is, and very much
It's
is.
it's really, oh my God. So okay, I want to explore this. So it's like Um, and this is key, because whenever you're doing intake, which we do, we teach how to do intake for different issues as well,
Mhm.
right? It's like
Yes,
it's so critical that you are not judged, and it's not even what you say, it's the way you look.
it is. It is.
I once
It's
had a fight with my ex a long time ago where she got really angry at me because of what I was thinking. I didn't even say it. I said, "Wait a second." Go ahead. Go
it
ahead.
is. It is. So it's really interesting. I I had a coworker and years ago, and she had cancer, and she was talking to me about it, and she said, "You're the second person in years when I shared you didn't back off."
Who?
She
Who?
said, she said people back off and shrink away
Oh,
be- because of the topic of cancer.
oh, it's perfect.
And
Oh,
so, yeah,
go ahead. Go ahead because then, I got another story.
go ahead.
Oh, this is very similar story. There's the book by Baba Ram Dass called "How Can I Help?" And he
Mhm.
says that he came across this guy who had been paralyzed for years, and the guy said to him, "I just wish." He said, "I've been to every doctor, healer, psychic, shaman, sound healer you could imagine, and I just wish one of them would see me as whole instead of
Mhm.
broken."
Mhm. Mhm. And that sends chills. It's so important. People react and respond to you based on if you're hearing them,
Mhm.
if you're hearing them rather than judging them.
So, I mean, this is so critical. So, because I know I don't have it down. I mean, I sometimes look at people and just by the sound of their voice, you know, I go, oh, right. I mean, I misjudge people all the time still. I know,
Uh-huh.
just last week, I remember this guy had a PhD. I didn't know it. And I kind of looked at him and thought he was completely different. And then he told me I had a PhD. I'm like, holy moly, he was a professor, right?
Mhm.
And so how do you, I mean, what are some guidelines on how to not do the judgment? I mean,
The way that you learn not to do the judgment is you begin to become your own filter. So when you're speaking with someone and you feel that little judgment creeping up, you have to go, that's not them, that's me. You have to let it go. If I'm in a session with someone and I feel that my own anger or a judgment coming up, that's my clue to ask questions to understand more.
hmm,
So that's the direction. If you're feeling a judgment, know that it's not your judgment. I was doing an
hmm,
assessment with a man from China, and his daughter was interpreting. And one of the questions is, do you think that you are you an alcoholic? And he said no. So I learned I don't allow my judgment on why he would say no to be there at all. And I simply said, so why did you choose no? And he said, I don't drink enough to be an alcoholic. I can't drink like Americans. So I mean, it's interesting and that is how you uncover your own. If you don't jump to that bias, but you go, okay, I'm feeling this
mm,
judgment, I'm
mm,
going to explore.
Exploration is the
Ex-
answer.
Exploration is the answer.
Wow, that's beautiful.
So,
I often think, what I do quite often, especially if I'm in a session, I often start with the statement, you are a perfect spirit in every way.
mhm.
In fact, that's one of the treatments. And we're doing that class tonight. You're a perfect spirit in every way. And then I say, what do you think's going on with yourself?
Yeah, that's interesting. That is really interesting. There's in my field, there are so many assumptions about people who have a substance abuse problem. I was working with clients that were court ordered to treatment, and I had my master's. I was working on my doctorate. Someone came into the room and they were asking me about a convention that was coming up, a recovery convention, and was I going? I said, "Oh yes, I'm going. I'll be there." And after that person left, my colleague, who's also a therapist, turned to me and goes, "You're one of them, an addict."
Oh, wow. Wow. Wow.
So it was kind of shocking in the moment, because that judgment it's hard to be judged as less than
Mm-hmm.
based on a life experience that you've had, that you have learned from and grown from. So that's an interesting way to think of it, isn't it? Being judged for a life experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Instead of who you are, especially at the core. Uh,
Right. Well, and it's
It's
our
in,
experience. Yeah.
it's interesting, when I teach the chakras, when you get to the solar plexus, that's
Uh-huh.
about it, whether you're above someone, where it can even be frustrated or upset with anybody or think they're less than, or whether you're below someone, right? And not
Right.
feeling good enough. And the middle is where you're equal to them. And so that's really helped me in a lot of ways when I'm feeling critical of people. I think, okay, am I above them? Wait a second. I'm totally equal.
Uh-huh.
We're totally
Right.
equal.
Mhm. When you feel that, it's freeing.
Uh-huh.
That in itself
Right,
is empowering.
right, right,
You get to be your whole self, your true self.
right. I love the idea of exploration. That's really, really cool. So, okay, so then there's there's the aspect of empathy
Yes,
and um, which is really getting out. It's the exploration, really. Empathy is exploration.
it is. It is.
Uh-huh.
It is. And let's see, and feeling,
Uh-huh.
it's like this is a feeling. Um, if if you were harmed, let's say that you were harmed and that feeling for you of being not good enough came from, like, say when you were 11 or 12 and someone said or did something. If you were to just be at a schoolyard and watch 11 and 12-year-olds getting out of school and thinking, would that child deserve that? You would have you would have a reaction. No. And that would help you go, well, wait a minute, neither do I. Neither did I. And it begins to disintegrate the structure that holds that myth that's not true in place, because you have a strong feeling about that wouldn't happen. They should not have that happen. Therefore, I should not have had that happen.
So anger is good.
Anger is good.
Yeah, because you're actually, because you don't, I mean, you've been taught to never say anything, right? I mean, I grew up
Right.
with severe alcoholic parents,
Me
right?
too. Hmm.
Yeah. And it's like, it was intense. I mean, there was like fights and blood and broken bones and all types of stuff. And, it's like to get angry is useless, right? At that
Dangerous
time.
and
What
dangerous.
and dangerous, very seriously dangerous, right?
Yes.
So I remember I never got angry ever until I was around 24.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was totally freeing when I first got really upset, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you let it go. You
Uh-huh.
quit carrying it inside and burying it.
Right, right. But then you got to move through it so it doesn't become rage.
Right. Rage is for children. Anger is for adults.
I love it. I love it.
Anger
Uh,
is feelings with clothes on it.
And as I point out, the if the duration is the problem, is the problem. I mean, anger is beautiful as long as you don't hurt anybody, right?
Right.
And it doesn't go too long because then it hurts you.
Exactly. It's going to highlight something for you. There now, one of the women in my study, Marie, one of her theme was a fear, and it was her alcoholic father raging in the home that terrified her, and her mother's silence frightened her.
Hmm.
So it was like a duel. And I
Hmm.
don't know if what your experience was, but it's like if you have two people that are supposed to protect you, and one is violent and raging and the other is oblivious,
Hmm.
then it's like doubly hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Mine were both pretty rageful. I have to
Mhm.
tell you what happened. That was really interesting for me. In my later years, I went to adult children of alcoholics meeting,
Mhm.
right? And I got up and I said, "My childhood was the worst you could imagine. It was horrible," right? And everybody else got up and said, "My childhood was the worst you can imagine." Oh, I said that they were trying to kill each other all the time. And then everybody else got up and said, my parents tried to kill me and told me I was a piece of shit, right?
Uh-huh.
And they might have done that when they were drunk, but afterwards, my parents were really supportive. Get an education, you can do anything you want. So they were actually very supportive of me in when they were sober. And so I never really had very any self-esteem issues like most people in the meeting were having,
Okay.
right?
Mhm.
Right? And I came out of that meeting thinking my childhood wasn't so bad
Mhm.
because my self-esteem, I've never been really clinically depressed. I mean, I've really always felt good about myself.
So it gave you a new perspective on that you were valued in a way they never were,
Right, right,
which
exactly.
can help you feel good about yourself.
Yeah,
That's nice.
yeah. So,
Um,
so we talk about, expressing where you're at with sound.
mhm.
Right? It's like, or even the anger, although to express anger too much sometimes just brings it up and doesn't move through it.
Uh-huh. Well, you need to move, you need to be able to express it. I mean, in therapy, they have the really soft, big hammers. You can bang stuff, but you can't harm it. And they always
Uh-huh.
have pillows you can pummel and hold on to and squeeze. Um, my personal journey is I'm a runner.
Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
I like to run. Um, Unusual, all of my master's was a double master's. So it was clinical psychology, but it was also somatic psychology.
Hmm.
So I had to learn to become to do massage. And I also, that can help anger get out through the body work. And sound goes along with the body work,
Oh
having
my
people
God.
make sounds.
I mean, I know people that were totally abused in younger years that are incredible blues singers now. In fact, one
Mhm.
of our presenters is just she brings that all that suffering totally through her voice, and you can totally do that when you're actually making sound for someone that's actually been abused. You can because you can totally relate, and then totally bring that sound through and out.
Mhm.
What I often do, here's a good example. It's like I will do the frustration and then do a releasing sound, kind of like ah, ah, right? Ah, and like I'm moving it out, right?
Yeah.
I commonly do that in treatments when people have like some stuff that that I want to help them release.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Um, that's really good.
So there's one thing that I do that's really you might find really useful or helpful or cool. Um, we do a workshop on transforming negative beliefs, and I go
Uh-huh.
through and I have each person say what negative belief they have, right? And then what we do is we turn it around backwards
Okay.
and we make the sound of the opposite.
Oh, okay.
But it's an interesting process because you just can't say, I can't say my one belief is I'm not loving enough sometimes. I can't say I'm loving all the time because my subconscious goes, yeah, right, give me a break. I know what you, right, I know what you did the other day, right? Right. So you have to turn it around in a way that your subconscious believes it 100%.
Uh-huh.
That's the goal. And so I can say, at my core, my essence is love.
Okay.
And I believe that 100%. And then I make the sound of it. And everybody else joins in,
Uh-huh.
right? And because a lot of people have that belief. And we go through all the different beliefs and turn them around backwards and make the sound to get it in the body,
Yeah.
right? The
Yeah.
truth.
So that might be a good practice to bring into some of the treatment programs.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Ah. It's really, I mean, these beliefs are the number one thing that hold anybody back.
They do. And which one of the things that we do is the stages of change theory, understanding people through the stages of change. And if you don't understand what the beliefs are, you can stop someone from making any change, from accepting any kind of help or treatment, because you have to use the right kind of questions and ideas and suggestions for them on how to proceed if there's going to be any change happen at all.
So it's really important to kind of study all the list of beliefs so you can really help people identify them and become aware of them.
It's kind of like the stages of change theory is there's the first is pre-contemplation. So you don't really think that you have a problem. And the
Mhm.
second is contemplation. You might have a problem. You might think you have a problem, and 2 minutes later, you're not really. And that can go back and forth. So if you're helping someone to identify a problem, but they really don't think they have a problem because they're in pre-contemplation, they aren't even
Mm,
thinking about, I don't
mm,
have a problem.
mm,
And you say,
mm,
you know what, you need to stop yelling at people, or you need to stop drinking. Well, I only yell at people that deserve it. And my drinking doesn't hurt anyone. I still work. I have a job. So they're going to have excuses. They're going to throw up walls. Now let's say you know that they came to you and they want to get over their anger or over their drinking. And so instead, if they're in pre-contemplation because someone told them to come, or they would divorce them, or they would lose their job, it would be, okay, so what are you angry about? What makes you angry? And how do you express that? And you get them to explore it completely in all of its elements. And out of that exploration, a clinician is going to be able to identify things to go further or ask more questions about. And that will help them to begin to make change, because they will have the insight, same as the story about the psychologist. You're asking the correct questions.
Cool. Wow. So I've thought about, putting together a protocol for the psychotherapy board or for training that would
Mhm,
include sound,
mhm,
so that we could say, okay, and there's two main areas. Well, there's quite a few areas actually. So one is to start with some sound, just to get people into a peaceful place, so their their uh, their walls go down more and they're
mhm,
more vulnerable, right?
mhm.
I mean, because
Absolutely.
you put somebody on the sound table, and after 10 minutes, they're like, oh, what, anything you say now, right? Okay, so there's that aspect. But I know a psychotherapist that's really good, and she actually does it the opposite, where she'll actually do all of the intake and talk about everything, and really bring it to a head, and then do sound for them based on that. And it's like it's kind of like a intuitive resolution, uh, or harmonization based on what's going on with them, which is really cool. I think the ideal is to actually do both. Do a little intake to get them and make it short, and then do any talk therapy, any other techniques, which could include getting them comfortable with making the sound of how they feel,
Mhm.
which is a little bit of a process for some people, because a lot of people are really scared to make the sound of how they feel, because we're kind of shut down. And then there's all types of techniques of working with sound, especially with their own voice. And then afterwards, after the session, then you do a whole sound thing. Like there's this one guy, Paul Hubbard. He's got a really detailed psychotherapy practice where he does like almost an hour of sound after he does the whole intake and the therapy session.
Mm. That I like the idea that you said of doing a short intake and then the sound, followed by a more in-depth intake,
Uh, uh-huh.
where someone is going to be much more open to sharing. They're going to go deeper. You're going to find out more, and you're going to be able to be more helpful.
I always feel also, if you can keep, as you said before, if you can get them into theta, they've actually are more relaxed, but they've also got way more capacity to actually uh, explore.
Mhm. Which is key. That's
Mm-hmm.
key.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you have, and just the humanity of doing that with someone is a transformative experience.
So you had mentioned there's these themes that you learned from your research.
Mhm.
What would those be?
Okay, so the first one, which is pretty interesting, is the dysfunctional myth. And I actually have the myths of the women. Um, I am powerless, no one believes me was one. Um, and that was based on authority. And the next was I will never fit anywhere. And that came out of Rose's story. And she was in foster care and authority, prison, jail. Darla was I'm marked, dark, and ugly. They were themes around. The first one was reframing that myth the dysfunctional myth. And so the belief in the myth that something was wrong with them is what drove the addiction. That's what led them to the addiction and kept them in the addiction, trying to escape that which they had identified as self. And so Rose, an example is Rose's was anger. That was her dominating narrative. And she said, I'll never fit in anywhere. My mom doesn't get along with me and no one protects me. So she ended up in foster care. When she got into recovery and she walked into a room with people, all of a sudden she belonged and she felt loved. There was no judgment in that room. She was in a room of addicts. I told you about Marie, and her narrative was also fear. And that was, I don't belong anywhere. And that was based on her family life with the father that was angry. She said she was silenced by her dad's rage and frightened by her mom's silence. I was hyper vigilant. I knew when to shut up, when to talk, when to sit and not say a word. And after she stopped using, she reframed who she was by moving into a safe environment and not having people around her who created those feelings of fear or having them silent. The second theme was developing self-agency. And
self-agency?
Mm-hmm. So self-agency is so that they felt a sense of power, a sense of empowerment. And there was a 4-step process for them to develop self-agency. First, they had to identify the myth that they grew up with, the distorted sense of their self. And then they had to be become aware that it was distorted, that it wasn't true, in fact. They then developed a sense of their self that was capable of making changes. And they could make changes, therefore they became responsible for their life circumstances. And they stepped out of being a victim and into being the creator of their own life.
Oh, this is cool. In my presentation, I talk about the sound of these different emotions. Mm-hmm. And you could say, okay, in that old myth, what would that make the sound of what that felt like, right? Here's powerlessness.
Yep.
Right.
Right. You can't quite get it out.
Right. I mean, and then, okay, now make the sound of you completely empowered to make changes. Hiya! Right?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, and then you totally get it in their body.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, you would. Because it's in that moment and through all of that the 4th step is because they're getting it out and they're in control. They're no longer dependent on external authorities for their own well-being.
Whole.
Then the 3rd theme that I wrote out here was relational knowing. And that was they began to know themselves in recovery through the relationships that they had. They identified that it was in the relationships of childhood, cultural, family, social, that they developed who they were. And so now they began to identify that and changing the relationships, establishing new relationships with themselves, with others, was a kind of empowerment even. Now someone would help them and they didn't shame them for being an addict or an alcoholic or dropping out of school for whatever reason. Instead, it was like, you did what it took to survive. And now what would you like to do next? Where would you like your life to be? So it's taking the garbage and that negativity and putting it aside and really looking at who are you and what would you like to do? It's, when my daughter was little, I watched her because did parenting classes also, and she went into the kitchen and got a glass of water and poured it on the floor. And then I mean, a lot of parents would go, "What are you doing?" and yell and get angry. I was always curious, and so I watched her. She went and got the mop, and she mopped the floor. So it's like, don't jump to conclusions. Play it out.
What a great story. So it's interesting because the main tenets of Maria Montessori
Uh-huh.
is relationship to self, to others, and then to source, which is often we just talk about as nature.
Right, right.
Hmm.
Well, that's my fifth theme was
Oh,
spiritual
oh,
transformation.
oh, okay,
But
cool.
and the fourth is epistemological journey of the self. And epistemological is the theory of knowledge. So it's the journey of knowing, learning about oneself and self-knowledge. Um, Adding information to your knowledge base. There's the instrumental piece of it. Um, so once they began that journey of learning who they really were, they were able to stand up to their abusers. And so that was what the women did, although they did often lose, valuable relationships they would have chose not to lose in their family in order not to be around their abusers. Abusers are often included in family reunions, even when everyone knows what they did to the children,
Hmm.
because the family systems aren't healed. So, so that can be tough. But the spiritual transformation was a shift in relationship to families, to self, to world, to nature. Some of them were abused by church people, ministers,
Hmm.
priests.
Hmm.
One of my women, she was Catholic, and her parents dropped her off at church. And the Catholic priest, he was in one of those podiums that went up in the air so he could see the congregation. And after Mass, he would take her upstairs and molest her.
Hmm.
And she thought that when he was in his podium, he was up there talking to God, and God was telling him what to do to her. So she didn't make the connection until she was older. Her parents dropped her off, therefore it must be the right place to be. She didn't make those connections. And her family, she had an interesting childhood, a really interesting childhood.
Hmm.
So once again, with the spiritual transformation, there was a need for reflective practices. So once again, there is a need for music. I know my own recovery journey, I did sit in drum circles. I did listen. I went to some special where women sang, which was just sounds and noises, not words. I can't even remember all of what it was, except it was fantastic. I know I loved it. I loved every time I was involved in something that involved sound. It was very freeing for me personally.
It's interesting. I worked with at an addiction center that happened to be right next to my school in San Francisco for about a year. Actually, one of our students was living there, and we I did sound every week for a large group, and then
Uh-huh.
brought them over and put every one of them on the sound table, and we did sound baths for them, and it was so effective. It was incredibly effective. Um, and I realized that um, I got this really clear idea that a lot of addiction, although it seems like I didn't realize that so much addiction came from abuse, actually.
Mhm.
I didn't realize that before. But a lot of addiction also, I think, is because people also are just bored with life, and they're really yearning for spirit, a connection
Mhm.
to spirit,
Mhm.
right? Which is totally not boring once you really develop it, right?
Right.
So what I do is I work with uh, first loving self, doing the
Mhm.
sound of loving yourself and how that feels with just the sound, right? And then we do the whole realm of actual universal love,
Uh-huh.
unconditional love, and then universal love. And we have a whole range of exercises to actually help people to start connecting to that and visualizing it and actually bringing it in, which is sometimes takes quite a while, right?
Mhm.
Can really
Mhm.
take quite a while, but it's like the holy grail, right? Because the
Right.
second you get that channel of universal love going, it's like, oh my God, you can fill yourself up completely and it never goes away. So there's no dependency, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
And it's a non-threatening way to begin healing.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
If you, especially when you look at addiction, there's been a lot of abuse, a lot of fear, and so that the way that you get close to someone, it has to be incredibly safe and non-threatening, which music is.
Right. It's so funny because if I said, "Oh, this is God's love," I could lose a lot of people right there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right? Yeah, so it's universal love and it's indescribable. I often tell people about, the to spend a night watching the near death experience YouTube videos.
Uh-huh.
And like 90% of them say, I went through the tunnel into the light and there was indescribable love there,
That's it. Mhm.
right? Yeah.
White light love.
God, yeah, I had everybody, every session making the sound of love and sending it to each other. And it's so cool when you just say, just do it. Everybody does it and does love.
Yeah.
It was also really cool because I would go around, I said, okay, make the sound of how you're feeling these days. And a lot of them, were just in for, full range. A lot of, just got off heroin and everything. So some were really fragile. And it was really interesting. It was so beautiful
Mhm.
because this one guy was like, fuck me. Right? But he was totally expressing it with sound.
Mhm.
It's like, what? Right? And it was so cool to see them really feel it and then using the sound and transforming it to a peaceful, completely still point.
Mhm.
And it's so cool. Just like any group, everybody was completely still.
Mhm.
Yeah. Because
That's
there's,
unusual in a group.
uh-huh, right, right.
Very.
And there's so many. I mean, when you're coming off drugs, it's like major anxiety in the body that's really really tricky. That's why the sound lounge. We had a guy I worked with in the very beginning of when I was working with the sound lounges. He was connected to two addiction centers in Colorado, Chicago, and he said the use of the sound lounge there was over the top effective because it totally gets that anxiety physically out of the body.
Anxiety is an incredibly huge problem with addicts and alcoholics, even after they get out over detox. It often leads to relapse if there isn't a way to address the anxiety, because the alcohol and drugs releases the anxiety. It gives a false sense of you're okay.
I just think they should all become professional sound healers. I know that's silly, but but it's like, a new lifestyle of sound healing is really just the best, right? Or just picking up as much as they can, right?
it they want, addicts and alcoholics want to change. They want help. They don't want to be judged. They want unconditional positive regard. They want love.
Hmm.
Many of them haven't experienced it.
It's so funny because I remember going in, I thought, oh, they are really not, it may be hard to get love into them, may take a while. And I was completely wrong.
Mhm.
I mean,
No, it's
it was like love and spirits never far from the surface in anybody.
no. And I think that some of the things that people don't realize or think about is addicts and alcoholics have to be incredibly clever, resourceful, and intelligent to stay
Mm,
loaded.
mm,
How do you
mm.
stay loaded with no job? How do you stay loaded when you could get arrested for it if you aren't very careful? So there's a complexity that isn't acknowledged in people who are seeking recovery.
Uh,
When my advisor, my major professor at my university, read my first draft of the women's stories, she looked at me. She came from an upper class background. I'll call it that. I'll label. And she goes, "Where did you find these women? Were you in a mental hospital? Did you go to a mental hospital?" That is how she misconstrued their history,
wow.
that there must be something for them to have had these experiences made them in some way crazy. And that wasn't true. I didn't even know that they were accomplished women. Some of them had doctorates.
Wow.
Some were teachers. It wasn't that it was interesting. It was interesting. That quick judgment. It was a quick judgment on a group of women.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that's not how I saw them.
So this seems like the ultimate lesson on not judging people as we take this into our life. Whether people are just regular people, and we do judgments all the time,
Mhm.
right? Right?
Right.
I mean, it's so critical. So okay. So when you've done it now, if you're when you say explore, what is the it's like asking more about what they said their behavior was. Is that the basic exploration?
I would ask, what was the benefit?
Mm, mm,
What was the value? Um,
mm.
I had a woman ask me once, she goes, my son keeps getting up on the dining room table. And I said, well, why don't you just, and she was angry with him and like he's a bad kid. And I said, why don't you just ask him what he's trying to see? It's taking it to it's kind of like there's genius in simplicity. Take it back a couple of steps.
Mm-hmm.
I had a couple that were, because I did parenting classes for people that needed, through the courts, they had to have some parenting. And I had a couple come in and they were just furious with their 3 and 5-year-old boys who had broke the steering wheel in their car. And I said, so were they in the car alone? Well, yeah. Did you know? Uh-huh. I said, so they did a really good job. They played really hard. They were just doing, but you have to unpack, take away the judgment that behavior is bad and find out where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
Another example was
Nice.
a man. He was really angry because he told his little boy to go clean up his room, put everything away. And he was like 4, I think. And there's different ways that your brain develops. And reciprocal thinking hasn't happened yet for a child at 4 or 5. That doesn't happen until 7 or 8. And so he went up and he took all that stuff, peanut butter and jelly sandwich, clothes, everything, and shoved them under the bed, in the closet. Nothing showed. And I go, were you angry with him? He goes, of course I was angry. I said, you didn't tell him to put things where they belong. You told them to put them away. He did exactly what you asked. From his ability and capacity of thinking, he put them away. So it's about, we're passing judgments and creating and being mean simply because we don't understand where are they coming from by asking the simple questions. Well, why'd you put the peanut butter sandwich under your bed?
Hmm.
Well, it was away. You didn't want to see it.
The next level is compassion.
It is. It is.
Then you don't have to really even explore the behavior at all. You just go, the way I do it, and I talk about it in my presentation, is everybody's entrained into the craziness of this society for tens of thousands of years, and it's really nobody's fault. Anything anybody does, it's all patterning from many lifetimes of ancestry.
It is patterned.
Right, right. And therefore, it's all perfect.
Sometimes it's unlearning.
Mm-hmm.
it's unlearning what you're doing. Um, I think what you're kind of talking about, you can't, let's stop thinking about pointing blame,
Mm-hmm.
and looking at why are we angry at people? We're usually more angry at ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think that people who are doing a lot of judgments are being much more harsh in their judgments of themselves.
Well, there's the tricky part when you need to set boundaries at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably the hardest part, is for people to have compassion at the same time that they're setting the boundaries.
I think when you're able to set clear boundaries, it's easier to have compassion
Mm-hmm.
because you've established that boundary.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was talking all day. I'm an introvert. When I would come home, I really liked to relax, just have a cup of tea and not talk. And I came home one day and my daughter, she goes, Mom, I have your tea ready for you so you can go relax. And it was like she understood the boundary to the point where she even got to a point of wanting to help me with that boundary.
Mm.
So it's the same. When you have a healthy boundary, it takes all the stress away.
Okay, so there's what I've found, what I do in a class is a full range of boundary sounds.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so, and this is what I've learned, because sometimes when people set boundaries, it feels like they're yelling at me, right?
Right,
Right?
right,
And, but maybe I knew a person, actually someone I was with, who hadn't set boundaries and needed to learn to actually set boundaries. So she was a little over the top when she set her boundaries. But I immediately got, well, you're learning to do this, right? So,
right.
so there's the really intense boundary of like, no, right, right, which can be good for your lower self, right? No, and I actually have people make the sound of that, no, right, to get in their power, which is we
Right,
talked about
right.
earlier. Okay, but you could also set boundaries by saying no
Yeah.
and be firm, no, right? Or you could set boundaries like for the baby or the kitty getting in the toilet.
Right.
No, 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 right? Or you can even set boundaries, which I love it when people do this way, with humor.
Yeah.
No, not going to do that. Nope, 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 no, no, no.
Yeah. 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 That's it. I love the humor part. I think the humor is good. And I think that people are conditioned, especially children, based on how you treat them.
Uh-huh.
So if you're constantly yelling at a child, yelling becomes a norm. It's not anything. It doesn't mean anything. It's the same when you're training your animals. You don't want to terrify people. You want to set healthy boundaries, funny boundaries, show empathy, show feeling. Your child can have a piece of candy and they didn't brush their teeth. And you go, oh, I wish you could, but you didn't brush your teeth.
I love it. I love it. And then also what I do is I say, okay, set boundaries firmly and run love at the same time. Let me show you. It's
Okay, I want
tricky.
to see
It's
this.
tricky. It's tricky.
Okay.
Okay. No. No. No, not quite. Because you got to be firm still. You're being
Right.
abused. You're being abused. You can't not. You can't be wishy-washy. No. There we go. No.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It
It's
is.
and
I can hear it. Yeah.
the Dalai Lama even talks about it. He says sometimes you have to set boundaries seriously, but still run love.
Yeah. That's tricky.
It's mastery. It takes
Yeah.
mastery to do that one.
It does. It does.
Mhm. Cool.
Um, my dog is laying here and she all of a sudden perked her ears up when you started doing that.
My kitty goes running when I do
Oh,
that. Cool. Well, this has just been a pleasure and so important. You know, I just feel inspired because the potential with massive funding, which is happening these days,
It is. It is.
to help so many people and do what we said in the beginning, to actually set up treatment centers or everywhere. It could really happen, right?
It could.
And it's just dramatic how it could affect, because the the one thing I always say, as a lot of people don't realize, but most people do, if anybody's suffering, we're all suffering.
Mhm. It's true.
Yeah, we're all
And
one.
and and I think for these centers to be open, to understand that it is through music, it is through sound that we're going to open the pathways to transformative learning. It's it's about being able to identify the stages. Oops, sorry, I'm trying to turn that off. Okay. Identify the stages um, that people go through and how it helps so that you can get more funding.
Mhm. Cool, cool, excellent. Well, thank you so much for
Mhm.
all of your work and your presentation here. It's just been inspiring.
Oh, thank you. You've been inspiring for me as well.